So we can start back. There is some return. So the next presentation is work that I have done together with Angelo De Angelis, who is a trainer of the Joint Services Staff College of the Italian Armed Forces. It has been an exercise for proposing a methodology for assessing international crisis. It's mainly based on the work that he has done in the international, in the Joint Services Staff College, and we have built a little bit upon this, but Angelo for sure will tell us a little bit more about this this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano, for the introduction. I'm not going to bore you with any more details about who I am and what I do. We just go into the issue at hand, which is, as Stefano said, the analysis of a complex crisis. When we say complex crisis in this work, we usually refer to those crises that reach the attention of the international community because of usually violence, human suffering, and degraded governance. And as was mentioned earlier, even by Kim Warren, two analytical and time-consuming approaches may lead to an effective comprehension. On the other hand, if we take things too simple and too linear, we can get to very ineffective intervention as well. So we face ourselves with the problem of coming up with some way in between to come up with a good way to understand a crisis, but that would not use up all the time available and would not lead to too simplistic of a conclusion to be useful. And we came up with this idea of a just right methodology, which is the Goldilocks metaphor. You know, she comes in a little house inhabited by 3 little bears. Everything comes in 3 sizes. It's either too big, too small, or just right. So we are trying to provide something which is just right for the task of understanding something very complex. And it is complex, and the time is little because of what this graph tries to show. That when things start to go wrong and people start to act in more extreme ways in pursuit of their objectives, conditions go far away on the acceptable scale, which means at some point people as a whole are going to start to suffer and not be happy about their conditions. When the international community becomes aware of such situations, usually it's been long since the situation started and has had time to escalate to a level which made it quite unbearable for those involved. So therefore, the time that we have to comprehend and set some action in place is usually very short. Sometimes it's never enough, sometimes always almost too late. The reason why things escalate is in what we propose here as a generic crisis structures, or an archetype, if you will, where you will have some reinforcing loops between these sets of variables, where you can see that the poor governance leads to violence, and violence reinforces the governance. And in turn, violence and the degrading of human conditions go hand in hand, reinforcing each other. And along the same line can be said about the governance and the conditions of the people. And if you see now, we have created like a major clockwise loop linking the 3 areas, and another major counterclockwise loop linking the same 3 variables, which brings the point that no matter how you look at it, whenever there is imbalance in one of these areas, the situation will escalate. It's just a matter of time, but it will escalate. And it will escalate because actors in the international community put actions in place, meaning they act, choosing a behavior to change the conditions that they do not like. And that not liking comes from a set of objectives that the actor gives himself in pursuit of interest and motivations. And each objective is in relation to the capability available. So an actor in the international system will be performing actions and putting behaviors in places just to change things to the way that he would like them to be. But then, of course, we don't have only one actor. We have plenty of actors in the international system. Therefore, conditions are the result of the influences of behaviors onto each other and on the conditions itself, as this schematic tries to explain. So to get to the bottom of things, we have put things in order to come to a good comprehension, which has the objective, our objective, to fill that scheme of how the three macro variables are related to each other. By going through this 6-step process, we should be able to populate that scheme. The first one is just trying to make sense, a general sense of what's going on. We usually do this through applying filters to a situation. We analyze political systems, military systems, and you can read the rest of the acronyms: economic, social, infrastructure, and information, which means basically reading a whole bunch of stuff about a situation, trying to label things for what we think they belong to in terms of major systems. It would be easier to do it this way than any other way, because then we can relate each item to the specific box in which to put a governance, violence, or a human condition. And we bring in our operational case, the Mali example, to just lead you through and see how we can use this methodology to understand an actual situation. This is just a snapshot of a selection of data from the study we did on Mali. And just to highlight a few aspects relating to the economic and the social domain. There's a whole lot more to know about Mali in terms of systems, but this is just to give you an idea of what we are referring to. The next step is to analyze the actors, all those entities that they are doing something in pursuit of some objectives. But before we analyze the objectives, we need to understand the why, which leads in the motivations and interests. So we analyze each actor in terms of why is he doing what he's doing, what's motivating him, what interests is it trying to pursue, and what capabilities does he have to his avail. And then the objective will come clear in terms of what he's trying to achieve by his actions. Again, referring to Mali, this is just the independentists, the Mouvement National pour la Libération de l'Azawad. So it was the first independentist movement in Mali, which dates back as far as 1960. Their motivations is basically their ethnic identity, interests, among others, the possibility to exploit some mineral resources in the sub-Saharan region that they were claiming. Their capabilities, besides their own combat force, which was remarkable, they had an injection of fresh combatants from the Libyan crisis when Gaddafi was turned over. All of his militiamen came back to the Tuareg area, and they were ready to fight for another cause, which kind of went hand in hand with the Mali cause. And the objectives in the end, which are the independence from the Malian state, and later on, the containment of the Islamist shift. We analyze the history of a crisis, which means, as Kim said this morning, we have to make ourselves aware of the trend of which we're now seeing the latest evolution. And we do that by going through the historical event. Each event, from what we said so far, is the result of underlying behavior, and each event will be at the origin of new system conditions. If we take each historical event and we do this analysis, we will be starting to see causes and effect, which will help us to put things together in the final effort, which is the causal loop diagram. Just to give you again an example, the violent revolt of late 2011, early 2012 was just an historical event, observable, measurable, and it was there in front of everybody's eyes to analyze. This just applies the step 2 to the single event. So we go and see what underlying behaviors were at the origin of the event and what conditions were fostered by the event taking place. And as you see, is the stream of cause and effect. The next step, we take one step further in trying to understand the relation of causes and effect between behaviors and conditions. And we look at threats. So we look at specific situations that make an actor change the way he's doing things because he feels threatened. And they have to be serious things, like an invasion or even a natural disaster. So serious stuff that requires an actor to do something that he wasn't doing before, or to do a lot more of something that he was doing. Usually these conditions are related with each other, and they can be either cause and effect of pre-existing or subsequent conditions. It helps to see these conditions in a hierarchical sequence, starting from the founding elements, so the survival, the ideologies and the values, to more, to less funding and more structural, dealing with the social system, the political system, which goes back to the first step. So it's all linked together. So everything that we have learned so far could find a place in one of these ovals. And just again, to stick with the Mali example, this is just a classification of conditions that were studied in January 2012 when before the French intervention took place. I'll give you a few seconds to read through it. Having done all this, we come to the point where we're able to select the main defining variables of our problem, which incidentally is, we will find them amongst the conditions that we have analyzed so far, and they will be our problem variables. And because we propose this as a crisis archetype, we went a step further and created a database of recurrent variables that we found common to most modern-day crises, each one pertaining to a specific domain of governance, violence, and human suffering. And then we take this and we apply it to our case study, which is Mali, and we have selected and rewarded some variables that are specific to the Malian crisis. And you can see them up there. And the last step, which is the building of the causal loop, requires us to put everything that we've learned, all those links of cause and effect, all those actors' motivations and behaviors into one big scheme that makes sense. And for the Mali example, this is what we came up with. Now, we're not going to go into much details of all the area, but in the remaining 3 minutes, I will point out that in line with the initial scheme, where you could see the loops between the three areas, in here we were capable of highlighting several cross-area loops that corroborate the idea that these three areas are self-reinforcing, meaning that if governance starts deteriorating, somehow it can only go worse from there unless something is changed. And the same is said for the escalation of violence and the worsening of the human condition. One close-up we're going to take on the Tuareg issue, and we highlight, hopefully it can be seen from the back, how the main variables of this part of the problems are related. The credibility of the Malian government versus the strength of the separatist cause. Those are the two problem-defining variables. In between, we see some behavioral variables. Why are they behavioral? Because these are courses of action that the two actors have put in place. Specifically, the Malian government gave up his capability of performing proper policies to include the minority, which is the top variable, inclusive policies, and resorted to mafia-like relationships. So they do local deals with power brokers to keep the revolt under control, which eventually kept the revolt under control, but created the conditions to further undermine the credibility. All this led to dynamics that could be reproduced by this graph, where you can see the white line being the government credibility and the yellow line being the strength of the independentist cause. Through a period that goes from 1960 to the current day, the time zero is 2012, when we did the study. You can see initially the government credibility went up. Mali was part of a program that in the area was trying to build up democratic states, and looked like Mali was responding well. All the indicators that we were looking at were showing that Mali was on a good path to be in a democratic state. But undergoing the independentist cause was never addressed with proper policies. Therefore, it kept fermentating to a point where, with the contribution of the Libyan crisis, it came up as an armed rebellion. What happened after that is just the Malian government trying to cope, being able to, the armed forces trying to take control of the situation through the coup d'etat, and everything else is history from then. So this is just an idea of how this model could help us understand, and if we understand properly, we should be able to shape an intervention in a better way. When we say we, I put myself in the shoes of a policymaker at the international level, be it the UN or any alliance or any actor deciding to take active part in the resolution of a crisis. And to conclude on the issue, just on the Malian situation, just some insight that we were able to infer from our analysis that I share with you, just to show again that we don't need to go too far into detail, as Kim said this morning, to make this model useful, yet this provides sufficient enough depth to make good sense of what happened and what's happening, so that we can shape our intervention in a way that hopefully will not make things worse and it will be contributing to the resolution of the crisis. With that, I conclude. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Angelo. Great timing. Time for questions. Eduardo?
And I'll also be carrying the microphone.
Yes, that's
yes,
our hostess, Angelo.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for your very interesting work. I think personally that one of the areas where System9 is very useful when you are dealing with corporate strategy, for example. It's another actor when you have to plan investment in foreign countries and to sketch down the structural features of institutional and political